Hi class, today we're about to get started with chapter 4 of The Lightning Thief, and I'm so excited because this is the chapter that we start to see a lot more action, and a lot of our questions that we've been having over the past three chapters will be answered. So let's quickly review what we just learned in the last chapter. So the last chapter, Percy Jackson goes home. We learn a lot about his mom and his relationship with his mom and his relationship with his stepdad, how he feels about his stepdad. His mom and him go to Montauk, and while they're in Montauk, there is a huge storm, and his friend Grover shows up, and that's kind of where we're left off. And he finds out Grover is not necessarily a human, so we're going to learn a little bit about that today too. So, like I said, there's going to be a little bit more action in this story today. So our objective for today is to be identifying the conflicts that we see. Remember, a conflict is a problem, or it's what goes wrong in the story. So there are 4 different types of conflicts. Character versus self, when you're having a problem in your head, you're trying to make a decision, but you're kind of going back and forth. Character versus character, when 2 characters are having an argument or a physical conflict. Character versus nature, when a character is having a problem with nature, whether it be a natural disaster, something going on in the ocean, problems surviving in the wilderness with other animals, or character versus society, when a character is having a problem with the law or the rules that we have to live by in our world. So we're going to be looking at what conflicts we see Percy having in this chapter. So right now, if you are ready, you can pull up chapter 4. It's linked under day 134, and you can pause this if you need to get ready and get all set up. So, chapter 4. My mother teaches me bullfighting. We tore through the night along dark country roads. Wind slammed against the Camaro. Rain lashed the windshield. I didn't know how my mom could see anything, but she kept her foot on the gas. Every time there was a flash of lightning, I looked at Grover sitting next to me in the back seat, and I wondered if I'd gone insane, or if he was wearing some kind of shag carpet pants. But no, the smell was one I remembered from kindergarten field trips to the petting zoo. A lanolin from the wool, the smell of wet barnyard animal. All I could think to say was, "So you and my mom know each other?" Grover's eyes flitted to the rearview mirror, though there were no cars behind us. "Not exactly," he said. "I mean, we've never met in person, but she knew I was watching you." Watching me? "Keeping tabs on you, making sure you were okay, but I wasn't faking being your friend," he added hastily. "I am your friend. What are you exactly?" "That doesn't matter right now." "It doesn't matter? From the waist down, my best friend is a donkey." Grover let out a sharp, throaty blah. I'd heard him make that sound before, but I'd always assumed it was a nervous laugh. Now I realized it was more of an irritated bleat. "Goat," he cried. "What?" "I'm a goat from the waist down." "You just said it didn't matter." Blah. "There are satyrs who would trample you under hoof for such an insult." Whoa, wait, satyrs? You mean like Mr. Burner's myths? Were those old ladies at the fruit stand a myth? Was Miss Dodds a myth? So you admit there was a Miss Dodds? Of course! Then why? The less you knew, the fewer monsters you'd attract. Grover said, like that should be perfectly obvious. We put mist over human eyes. We hoped you'd think that the kindly one was a hallucination. But it was no good. You started to realize who you are. Wait a minute. What do you mean? The weird bellowing noise rose up again, somewhere behind us, closer than before. Whatever was chasing us was still on our trail. "Percy," my mom said, "there's too much to explain, and not enough time. We have to get you to safety." "Safety from what? Who's after me?" Oh, nobody much," Grover said, obviously still miffed about the donkey comment. "Just the Lord of the Dead and a few of his bloodthirstiest minions." "Grover!" "Sorry, Mrs. Jackson. Could you drive faster, please?" I tried to wrap my mind around what was happening, but I couldn't do it. I knew this wasn't a dream. I had no imagination. I could never dream up something this weird. My mom made a hard left. We swerved into the nearer road, racing past darkened farmhouses and wooded hills, and pick-your-own-strawberry signs on the white picket fences. "Where are we going?" I asked. "The summer camp I told you about." My mother's voice was tight. She was trying, for my sake, not to be scared. "The place your father wanted to send you." "The place you didn't want me to go?" "Please, dear," my mother begged. "This is hard enough. Try to understand. You're in danger." "Because some old ladies cut yarn?" "Those weren't old ladies," Grover said. "Those were the fates. Do you know what it means? The fact that they appeared in front of you? They only do that when someone's about to die." "Whoa. You said you." "No, I didn't mean I said someone." "You meant you, as in me." "I meant you like someone, not you. Boys," my mom said. She pulled the wheel hard to the right, and I got a glimpse of a figure she'd swerved to avoid, a dark, fluttering shape, now lost behind us in the storm. "What was that?" I asked. "We're almost there," my mother said, ignoring my question. "Another mile, please, please, please." I didn't know where there was, but I found myself leaning forward in the car, anticipating wanting us to arrive. Outside, nothing but rain and darkness, the kind of empty countryside you could get way out on a tip of Long Island. I thought about Mrs. Dodds and the moment when she changed into the thing with the pointed teeth and the leathery wings. My limbs went numb from delayed shock. She really hadn't been human. She'd meant to kill me. Then I thought about Mr. Brunner, the sword he had thrown me. Before I could ask Grover about that, the hair rose on the back of my neck. There was a blinding flash, a jaw-rattling boom, and our car exploded. I remember feeling weightless, like I was being crushed, fried, and hosed down all at the same time. I peeled my forehead off the back of the driver's seat and said, "Ow." "Percy," my mom shouted. "I'm okay." I tried to shake off the daze. I wasn't dead. The car really hadn't exploded. We'd swerved into a ditch. Our driver's side doors were wedged in the mud. Our roof had cracked open like an eggshell and rain was pouring in. Lightning. That was the only explanation. We'd been blasted right off the road. Next to me in the back seat was a big, motionless lump. Grover! He was slumped over, blood trickling from the side of his mouth. I shook his furry hip, thinking, no. Even if you are a half-barnyard animal, you're my best friend, and I don't want you to die. Then he groaned, "Food!" And I knew there was hope. "Percy," my mother said, "we have to." Her voice flattered. I looked back. In a flash of light, though the mud splattered to the rearview windshield, I saw a figure lumbering toward us on the shoulder of the road. The sight of it made my skin crawl. It was a dark silhouette of a huge guy, like a football player. He seemed to be holding a blanket over his head. His top half was a bulky and fuzzy. His upraised hands made it look like he had horns. I swallowed hard. "Who is—" "Percy," my mother said, deadly serious. "Get out of the car." My mother threw herself against the driver's door. It was jammed shut in the mud. I tried mine, stuck too. I looked up desperately at the hole in the roof. It might have been an exit, but the edges were sizzling and smoking. "Climb out the passenger side," my mother told me. "Percy, you have to run. Do you see that big tree?" "What?" Pause for a second. It's getting really exciting. But before we keep moving on, I want us to think about what is the major conflict in this part of the story. So I'm seeing a conflict that's character versus nature. That's one of the conflicts I'm seeing, so that's the one we're going to talk about. So in this story, the conflict is that the car that they're driving, I'm thinking about what goes wrong in the story. I'm going to ask myself, what is the main character, or what do the characters in the story want, and what's preventing them from getting what they want? So I know what they want to do is they're trying to get to summer camp. Unfortunately, what prevents them from getting to summer camp is that there's a storm and the lightning strikes the car, and now they can no longer use the car to get there. and somebody's chasing them. So that's just another conflict that's kind of in there, but we're going to talk about that one later. So at this point in the story, the conflict is that the car they're driving to summer camp is struck by lightning. This causes the character to have to get out of the car and travel by foot the rest of the way. My evidence for that. In the text it says, we'd swerved into a ditch. Our driver's side doors were wedged in the mud. The roof had cracked open like an eggshell, and the rain was pouring in. Lightning. This proves that the car was hit by lightning, and that caused the conflict because now Percy, his mom, and Grover have to travel by foot to get to summer camp in order to save Percy's life. So I know that there's more conflicts weaved into this chapter right now. That's just one of the conflicts I saw. So I wanted to give you that as an example for how you could write your CER for your independent practice today. Everything that I said, all of the steps that I took to get there are all in the paper as well. So you can repeat this video, or you can always look at the paper, look at the document that I uploaded, and it gives you the board equals paper, and it gives you the model of my conflict that I just did for you out loud. We're going to keep reading, and we're looking for what character versus character conflict does Percy face in this chapter. So we just did the character versus nature. Now we're looking for character versus character. So let's keep reading. All right. Another flash of lightning, and through the smoking hole in the roof, I saw the tree man she meant. A huge, White House Christmas tree sized pine at the crest of the nearest hill. That's the property line, my mom said. Get over that hill and you'll see a big farmhouse down in the valley. Run and don't look back. Yell for help. Don't stop until you reach the door. Mom, you're coming too. Her face was pale, her eyes as sad as when she looked at the ocean. No, I shouted. You are coming with me. Help me carry Grover. Food, Grover moaned a little louder. The man with the blanket on his head kept coming toward us, making his grunting, snorting noises. As he got closer, I realized that he couldn't be holding a blanket over his head because his hands, huge, meaty hands, were swinging at his side. There was no blanket, meaning the bulky, fuzzy mass that was too big to be his head was his head. And the points that looked like horns. He doesn't want us, my mother told me. He wants you. Besides, I can't cross the property line. But we don't have time, Percy. Go, please. I got mad. Then mad at my mother, at Grover, the goat, at the thing with the horns that was lumbering toward us slowly and deliberately, like a bull. I climbed across Grover and pushed the door open into the rain. We're going together. Come on, Mom. I told you. Mom, I'm not leaving you. Help with Grover. I didn't wait for her answer. I scrambled outside, dragging Grover from the car. He was surprisingly light, but I couldn't have carried him very far if my mom hadn't come to my aid. Together, we draped Grover's arms over our shoulders and started stumbling uphill through wet, wasted high grass. Glancing back, I got my first clear look at the monster. He was 7 feet tall, easy, his arms and legs like something from the cover of Muscle Man magazine, bulging biceps and triceps, and a bunch of other seps, all stuffed like baseballs under vein webbed skin. He wore no clothes except underwear, bright white Fruit of the Looms, which would have looked funny, except that the top half of his body was so scary. Coarse brown hair started at about his belly button and got thicker as it reached his shoulders. His neck was a mass of muscle and fur leading up to his enormous head, which had a snout as long as my arm, snotty nostrils, and gleaming brass ring, cruel black eyes and horns, enormous black and white horns with points you just couldn't get from an electric sharpener. I recognized the monster all right. He had been in one of my stories, Mr. Burner told us. But he couldn't be real. I blinked the rain out of my eyes. That's Fasife's son, my mother said. I wish I'd known how badly they wanted to kill you. But he's the Don't say his name, she warned. Names have power. The pine tree was still too far, 100 yards uphill at least. I glanced behind me again. The bullman hunched over our car, looking in the windows, or not looking exactly. More like snuffling, nuzzling. I wasn't sure why he bothered since we were only about 50 feet away. Food, Grover moaned. Shh, I told him. Mom, what's he doing? Doesn't he see us? His sight and hearing are terrible, she said. He goes by smell, but he'll figure out where we are soon enough. As if on cue, the bullman bellowed in rage. He picked up Gabe's Camaro by the torn roof, the chassis creaking and groaning. He raised the car over his head and threw it down the road. It slammed into the wet asphalt and skidded in a shower of sparks for about half a mile before coming to a stop. The gas tank exploded. Not a scratch, I remembered Gabe saying. Oops. Percy, my mom said. When he sees us, he'll charge. Wait until the last second, then jump out of the way, directly sideways. He can't change directions very well once he's charging. Do you understand? How do you know all this? I've been worried about an attack for a long time. I should have expected this. I was selfish, keeping you near me. Keeping me near you, but... Another bellow of rage, and the bullman started tromping uphill. He'd smell us. The pine tree was only a few more yards, but the hill was getting steeper and slicker, and Grover wasn't getting any lighter. The bullman closed in. Another few seconds, and he'll be on top of us. My mother must have been exhausted, but she shouldered Grover. Go, Percy, separate. Remember what I said. Separate. Remember what I said. I didn't want to split up, but I had a feeling that she was right. It was our only chance. I sprinted to the left, turned, and saw the creature bearing down on me. His black eyes glowed with hate. He reeked with rotten meat. He lowered his head and charged, those razor-sharp horns aimed straight at my chest. The fear in my stomach made me want to bolt, but that wouldn't work. I could never outrun this thing. So I held my ground, and at the last moment, I jumped to the side. The bullman stormed past like a freight train, then bellowed with frustration and turned, but not toward me this time, toward my mother, who was setting Grover down in the grass. We'd reached the crest of the hill. Down the other side, I could see the valley, just as my mother had said, and the light of the farmhouse glowing yellow through the rain. But that was half a mile away. We'd never make it. The bullman grunted, pawing the ground. He kept eyeing my mother, who was now retreating slowly downhill, back toward the road, trying to lead the monster away from Grover. Run, Percy, she told me. I can't go any farther. Run! But I just stood there, frozen in fear, as the monster charged her. She tried to sidestep as she told me to do, but the monster had learned his lesson. His hand shot out and grabbed her by the neck as she tried to get away. He lifted her as she struggled, kicking and pummeling the air. Mom! She caught my eyes, managed to choke out one last word. Go! Then, with an angry roar, the monster closed its fists around my mother's neck, and she dissolved before my eyes, melting into light, a shimmering golden form, as if she were a holographic projection, a blinding flash, and she was simply gone. No! Anger replaced my fear. Newfound strength burned in my limbs, the same rush of energy I'd gotten when Mrs. Dodds grew talons. The bullman bore down on Grover, who lay helpless in the grass, the monster hunched over, snuffling my best friend, as if he were about to lift Grover up and make him dissolve too. I couldn't allow that. I stripped off my red rain jacket. Hey! I screamed, waving the jacket, running to one side of the monster. Hey, stupid ground beef! Rawr! The monster turned toward me, shaking his meaty fists. I had an idea, a stupid idea, but better than no idea at all. I put my back to the big pine tree and waved the red jacket in front of the bullman, thinking I'd jump out of the way at the last moment. But it didn't happen like that. The bullman charged too fast, his arms out to grab me whichever way I tried to dodge. Time slowed down, my legs tensed. I couldn't jump sideways, so I leapt straight up, kicking off the creature's head and using it as a springboard, turning in midair and landing on its neck. How did I do that? I didn't have time to figure it out. A millisecond later, the monster's head slammed into the tree, and the impact nearly knocked my teeth out. The bullman staggered around, trying to shake me. I locked my arms around his horns to keep me from being thrown. Thunder and lightning were still going strong. The rain in my eyes, the smell of rotten meat burned my nostrils. The monster shook himself around and bucked like a rodeo bull. He should have just backed up into the tree and smashed me flat, but I was starting to realize that this thing had only one gear, forward. Meanwhile, Grover started groaning in the grass. I wanted to yell at him, "Shut up," but the way I was getting tossed around, if I opened my mouth, I'd bite off my own tongue. "Food," Grover moaned. The bullman wheeled toward him, pawed the ground again, and got ready to charge. I thought about how he had squeezed the life out of my mother, made her disappear in the flash of a light, and rage filled me like a high-octane fuel. I got both hands around one horn, and I pulled backward with all my might. The monster tensed, gave a surprised grunt, and then snap. The bullman screamed and flung me through the air. I landed flat on my back in the grass. My head smacked against a rock. When I sat up, my vision was blurry, and I had a horn in my hands, a ragged bone weapon the size of a knife. The monster charged. Without thinking, I rolled to one side and came up kneeling. As the monster barreled past, I drove the broken horn straight into his side, right up under his furry ribcage. The bullman roared in agony. He flailed, clawing at his chest, and began to disintegrate. Not like my mother. In a flash, the golden light, but like crumbling sand, blown away in chunks by the wind, the same way Mrs. Dodds had burst apart. The monster was gone. The rain had stopped. The storm still rumbled, but only in the distance. I smelled like livestock, and my knees were shaking. My head felt like it was splitting open. I was weak and scared and trembling with grief. I had just seen my mother vanish. I wanted to lie down and cry, but there was Grover needing my help, so I managed to haul him up and stagger down the valley toward the lights of the farmhouse. I was crying, calling for my mother, but I held on to Grover. I wasn't going to let him go. The last thing I remembered is collapsing on a wooden porch, looking up at a ceiling fan circling above me, moths flying around, a yellow light, and the stern faces of a familiar-looking bearded man and a pretty girl, her blonde hair curled like a princess's. They both looked down at me, and the girl said, "He's the one. He must be." "Silence, Annabeth," the man said. "He's still conscious. Bring him inside." And that is the end of chapter 4. So today for your assignment, you're going to decide, or you're going to write a CER for what the character versus character conflict is. So right now, what you can do is you can open up the day 134 questions document, and you can type in your answer there. When you're done, make sure you log into your work for your independent practice. Have an awesome day, and we will read chapter 5 tomorrow. Happy Thursday. Bye.